What if the habits that could add a decade to your life weren't invented in a biohacker's lab, or discovered in a clinical trial, or sold in a supplement bottle for $99 a month? What if they were already being practiced thousands of years ago, by shepherds in the mountains of Sardinia, by philosophers in ancient Athens, by fishermen on a tiny island in the Pacific, long before anyone had the language of epigenetics or mitochondrial function or biological age to explain why they worked? Most people have no idea that modern longevity science, one of the fastest moving fields in all of medicine right now, keeps arriving at the same conclusions that ancient civilizations already lived by. Not similar conclusions, the same ones. Almost word for word. Today I'm going to show you 10 ancient habits that science has now proven can slow your biological age, reduce inflammation at the cellular level, protect your brain, and extend the number of healthy, functional years you actually get to live. These aren't trends. They aren't biohacks. They are thousands of years old, and the people who practiced them consistently were, by every measure we now have, among the healthiest human beings who ever lived. Stick around, because habit number 7 was practiced daily by centenarians in a place scientists have called the Land of Immortals, and it costs absolutely nothing. And habit number 10 is something modern medicine is now calling one of the most powerful anti-aging interventions ever studied. But it has no pill form. It never did. If you want ancient wisdom about health and longevity, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Habit 1. Deliberate fasting. Hippocrates, the man history calls the father of modern medicine, said it plainly in the 5th century BC. Instead of using medicine, fast for a day. He wasn't being poetic. He was being clinical, because ancient Greek physicians had observed, over generations of careful attention to their patients, that voluntary periods without food produced outcomes they couldn't fully explain, but couldn't ignore. Infections resolved faster. Mental clarity sharpened. People who fasted regularly seemed to age differently than people who didn't. It wasn't just the Greeks. Ancient Egyptians fasted as a purification practice. Pythagoras reportedly fasted for 40 days at a stretch, claiming it increased mental perception and creativity. A notion that today's neuroscientists have confirmed is based in measurable biochemistry. The Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca fasted regularly and wrote to his friend Lucilius that the practice made the body calm and still in a way that nothing else could replicate. What they were all observing without the vocabulary to name it was autophagy, a cellular recycling process that the body switches on when it isn't busy digesting food. The word comes from the Greek for self-eating. The cell literally consumes its own damaged components, clearing out dysfunctional proteins, malfunctioning organelles, and the cellular debris that accumulates with age. In 2016, Japanese scientist Yoshinori Osumi won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for mapping exactly how this process works. Studies now show that regular fasting triggers autophagy, reduces inflammatory markers across the body, improves insulin sensitivity, lowers biological age measurements, and has been linked to dramatically reduced rates of the diseases that kill most people in the modern world: heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, and type 2 diabetes. Hippocrates didn't need a Nobel Prize. He had 2,000 years of unbroken clinical observation, and he was right. Habit 2. Walking as daily medicine. There is a shepherd in Sardinia, Italy, who walks 5 mountain miles every single day. He has done this for his entire adult life. He is in his mid-90s. He has no gym membership, no fitness tracker, and no particular interest in longevity science. He just walks because that's what Sardinian shepherds do. That's what they've always done. Sardinia is one of 5 places on Earth that researchers have identified as blue zones, regions where people consistently live to 100 at 10 times the rate of the United States. And in every single one of those places, the centenarians share one physical habit above all others. They walk every day, not for exercise, because their lives require it. The ancient world understood this intuitively. Aristotle taught his students while walking. The peripatetic school of philosophy was literally named after the practice. Hippocrates prescribed walking for melancholy, poor digestion, and inflammatory conditions of the joints. Roman physicians recommended walking after meals as a non-negotiable daily habit for anyone who wanted to age well. Modern research has confirmed what these civilizations observed empirically. A landmark study by Brigham Young University found that adults who walked briskly for 40 minutes, 5 days a week, had a biological age 9 years younger than sedentary peers. 9 years. Not from a pharmaceutical intervention, not from a supplement, from walking. Researchers at Harvard Medical School found that regular walking improves DNA methylation patterns, the epigenetic markers that determine how fast your cells are aging, and reduces inflammatory biomarkers across multiple organ systems simultaneously. Walking builds muscle. It improves mitochondrial efficiency. It regulates blood sugar. It protects the brain. It does almost everything that the most expensive anti-aging protocols claim to do. The Sardinian shepherd didn't need the research. He just needed the mountain. Habit 3. Eating until 80% full. Hara, Hachi, Bu. Before every meal, older Okinawans recite an ancient Confucian saying that is more than 1,000 years old. Hara, Hachi, Bu. It translates roughly as, eat until you are 8 parts full, not until the plate is empty. Not until you're stuffed. Not until the food is gone. Until you are 80% full. Then stop. This sounds simple. It is extraordinarily difficult in practice, which is exactly why the Okinawans built it into a cultural ritual, a spoken mantra, a habit reinforced by community. Because they understood, without the nutritional science to explain why, that the gap between 80% and 100% full was where aging accelerated. What they were practicing was systematic, lifelong caloric restriction, not starvation, not deprivation, just consistent, gentle undereating. Okinawan centenarians typically maintain a body mass index between 18 and 22 throughout their entire lives. They consume fewer calories than almost any comparable population on Earth, and they live longer than almost any comparable population on Earth. The science behind this is unambiguous. Chronic caloric restriction reduces oxidative stress, lowers IGF-1, a hormone strongly linked to accelerated aging, reduces systemic inflammation, and slows the rate at which telomeres, the protective caps on your chromosomes that shorten as you age, erode. Every one of those mechanisms is directly tied to biological age. The Okinawans didn't need the science to tell them this. They could see it at their own tables, in their own families, across generations. Stop at 80%. Live longer. It was that simple. And it still is. Habit 4. Daily sunlight exposure. The ancient Egyptians built their temples oriented to capture the first light of day, not as an architectural flourish, as a daily practice. Every morning, priests and worshippers would stand in that first flood of sunlight as part of a ritual they understood, even without the science, to be physically and spiritually restorative. They weren't alone in this. Greek physicians prescribed sunlight as a treatment for melancholy and weakened constitutions. Roman bathhouses were specifically designed to allow maximum sun exposure alongside the bathing ritual. In traditional Ayurvedic medicine, standing in morning sunlight has been a foundational health practice for at least 3,000 years. Every civilization that produced long-lived populations built daily light exposure into the architecture of ordinary life. What they were observing across those thousands of years was the effect of vitamin D, though they had no name for it. Vitamin D is not really a vitamin at all. It is a hormone, one that regulates over 1,000 genes in the human body. It directly controls calcium absorption for bone density. It modulates the immune system's ability to fight infection and suppress autoimmune activity. It influences mood regulation, cardiovascular function, and insulin sensitivity. And the vast majority of modern humans are deficient in it. Because we work indoors, we live indoors, we have systematically removed from our daily lives the one thing the ancient world never thought to question, the simple daily act of standing in the sun. Studies show that optimal vitamin D levels are associated with significantly lower rates of cardiovascular disease, cancer, cognitive decline, and all-cause mortality. Research published in the British Medical Journal found that vitamin D deficiency accelerates epigenetic aging. The ancient world built sun exposure into the architecture of daily life because the results of having it and the consequences of losing it were written in how people aged. Habit 5. Cold water exposure. Roman bathhouses followed a specific sequence that every Roman citizen understood. Hot room, warm room, cold plunge. You did not leave without the cold plunge. It wasn't optional. It wasn't for the brave. It was the medicine. The entire sequence built toward that final shock of cold water because the Romans had observed empirically and over centuries that the people who took the cold plunge regularly were harder, leaner, and longer lived than the ones who avoided it. Ancient Greeks practiced cold water bathing as a morning ritual. Spartan warriors trained in freezing rivers not just for toughness, but because cold exposure was understood to be restorative in ways that heat alone was not. In traditional Japanese culture, cold water immersion, called misogi, has been practiced for thousands of years as a purification ritual that was simultaneously understood to be physically fortifying. Modern researchers studying cold water immersion have found that it triggers a cascade of biological responses with direct implications for aging. Cold exposure activates brown adipose tissue, a metabolically active fat that burns energy and generates heat, improving insulin sensitivity and metabolic function. It triggers the release of norepinephrine, which reduces inflammation. It increases the production of heat shock proteins, which repair damaged cellular proteins, the same damaged proteins whose accumulation is one of the core hallmarks of biological aging. Studies show that regular cold exposure reduces inflammatory markers, improves mitochondrial efficiency, and activates genetic pathways associated with cellular stress resistance and extended lifespan. What the Romans built into their bathhouse sequence as common sense, modern biology is now explaining molecule by molecule. The sequence was right. The cold plunge was always the point. Habit 6. Medicinal herbs as daily food. Ancient Egyptian medical papyri, some of the oldest medical documents on Earth, list turmeric, ginger, and dozens of herbs in over 300 therapeutic preparations. These weren't emergency medicines. They were daily foods, cooked into every meal, consumed every single day by every person for an entire lifetime. This was how the entire ancient world related to plants. Not as supplements you added when you felt sick, but as the baseline of how you ate. Hippocrates documented the medicinal properties of over 400 plants. Traditional Chinese medicine has used ginger as a foundational therapeutic herb for more than 2,000 years. In Okinawa, one of the longest-lived populations ever studied, researchers found the same 3 plants growing outside every centenarian's kitchen: mugwort, ginger, turmeric, not in capsules. In the garden, in the pot, in the bowl. What every one of those ancient traditions was observing was phytochemistry. The active compounds in these plants, curcumin in turmeric, gingerols in ginger, artemisinin in mugwort, are among the most potent anti-inflammatory and antioxidant compounds in the natural world. Curcumin specifically has been the subject of over 3,000 published clinical studies. It inhibits NF-κB, one of the primary molecular switches that drives chronic inflammation, the baseline inflammatory state that researchers now call inflammaging, and identify as the underlying mechanism behind most age-related diseases. Ginger contains compounds that reduce inflammatory prostaglandins more effectively than many pharmaceutical anti-inflammatory drugs without the side effects. These aren't incidental benefits from incidental foods. The ancient world built them into daily cooking because daily cooking is where medicine lives. In Okinawa, at age 5, children are placed into social groups called moai, groups of roughly 5 peers who commit to one another for life. They meet regularly. They share resources. They check on each other. They show up. One specific moai that longevity researcher Dan Buettner discovered had been meeting continuously for 97 years. The average age of its members was 102. This is not a coincidence, and it's not uniquely Okinawan. It is one of the most consistent findings in all of longevity research across every blue zone ever studied. The people who live the longest do not live alone. They are embedded deeply and for their entire lives in communities of mutual support and genuine human connection. The ancient world understood this without needing the research. Aristotle wrote that humans are social animals, not as a philosophical observation, but as a biological one. He meant that isolation was pathological. The Romans built their entire civic life around communal spaces. Indigenous cultures across every continent organized life around community rituals that reinforced social bonds as a matter of survival. Modern research has confirmed what these cultures practiced intuitively. Chronic social isolation is associated with a 45% increased risk of all-cause mortality. It accelerates biological aging. It raises cortisol levels, suppresses immune function, increases systemic inflammation, and accelerates cognitive decline at rates comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Harvard's longest-running study on adult development, now spanning more than 80 years, found that the single strongest predictor of healthy aging was not diet, not exercise, not genetics. It was the quality of a person's close relationships. The Moai didn't need the Harvard study. They had 97 years of evidence. They kept showing up. Habit 8. A reason to wake up. Ikigai. If you ask a 100-year-old Okinawan why they get out of bed in the morning, they will answer you immediately. Without hesitation. Without having to think about it. They will tell you about the garden they tend, the grandchildren they teach, the craft they've practiced for 60 years, the friends who are waiting for them. This is Ikigai, a Japanese concept that translates roughly into reason for being, but the translation doesn't capture the weight of it. Ikigai is not a goal. It is not an ambition. It is a sense of purpose so woven into daily life that its presence is barely noticed, and its absence is catastrophic. The ancient Stoics had a version of this. Seneca wrote extensively about the danger of a life without purpose, not as a moral failing, but as a health catastrophe. The Confucian tradition that shaped Okinawan culture prescribed daily engagement with work, community, and the natural world as a non-negotiable component of a long and healthy life. Modern research on this is striking. A study published in JAMA Network Open found that individuals with a strong sense of purpose had a significantly lower risk of death from all causes, including cardiovascular disease. Over a 14-year follow-up period, purpose is associated with lower cortisol levels, reduced inflammatory markers, better sleep quality, and improved immune function. Researchers believe it functions through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the same stress response system that, when chronically activated, drives most of the biological damage we associate with aging. You cannot buy Ikigai. You cannot supplement it. You cannot biohack it. You have to build it. The ancient world built it into the structure of daily life, and the people who had it consistently outlived the people who didn't. Habit 9. Deep, ritualized sleep. In ancient Rome, sleep was not a passive activity. It was a ritual. The evening meal ended at a reasonable hour. The home was darkened. The body was given time to wind down, and the afternoon nap, the meridatio, was a standard fixture of Roman daily life that no one questioned. You worked in the morning. You rested in the early afternoon. In ancient Rome, sleep was not a passive activity. Across ancient cultures, in the Mediterranean, in East Asia, in the traditional practices of every blue zone ever studied, sleep was structured, protected, and treated as a non-negotiable pillar of health rather than an inconvenience to be minimized. The ancient world did not glorify exhaustion. That particular pathology is modern. What those cultures were protecting, without the neuroscience to name it, was the glymphatic system, the brain's internal cleaning mechanism that activates almost exclusively during deep sleep. During the deep sleep stages, cerebrospinal fluid floods the brain at increased flow rates, washing out toxic proteins, including the amyloid beta plaques associated with Alzheimer's disease. The brain literally cleans itself, but only when you're deeply asleep. Miss that window consistently, and the waste builds up, year after year, decade after decade. The research on sleep and biological aging doesn't leave much room for debate. Chronic sleep deprivation is one of the most consistent accelerators of epigenetic aging ever measured. A large UK study of nearly 200,000 participants found that people who consistently slept fewer than 6 hours had a biological age measurably higher than those who slept 7 to 8. Sleep affects telomere length. It affects cortisol regulation, insulin sensitivity, and immune function simultaneously. Every system the body uses to slow its own aging runs its maintenance cycle at night. The Roman who took his afternoon nap and went to bed when it was dark wasn't being lazy. He was running his brain's cleaning cycle on schedule. Every night, for his entire life. Habit 10, the stillness practice, prayer, meditation, and silence. Here is the habit that modern longevity researchers keep arriving at last, because it's the one that fits least neatly into the language of biochemistry. And yet the data behind it is some of the strongest in the entire field. Every centenarian culture ever studied has a stillness practice. In Okinawa, it is the daily ritual of morning prayer to ancestors, tea with close friends, quiet reflection before the day begins. In Sardinia, it is the Catholic prayer that structures morning, midday, and evening. In the Seventh-day Adventist community of Loma Linda, California, another blue zone, it is the weekly Sabbath, a 24-hour period of complete rest, reflection, and disconnection from the demands of ordinary life. In ancient Greece, the Stoics practiced a form of morning meditation they called prosoke, a daily exercise in attention, intention, and present moment awareness. The ancient world, across cultures that had no contact with each other, converged on the same conclusion, that a life without regular stillness was a life being consumed by the body's own stress response. And the stress response, chronically activated, is one of the most destructive forces in human biology. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, when elevated chronically, damages the hippocampus, impairs immune function, accelerates telomere shortening, increases systemic inflammation, and dysregulates virtually every hormonal system in the body. Harvard Health Publishing has confirmed that persistent psychological stress is among the strongest predictors of accelerated biological aging and increased risk for every age-related disease studied. Meditation and prayer interventions have been shown in clinical trials to reduce cortisol, lower inflammatory markers, improve DNA methylation age, and lengthen telomeres in as little as 8 weeks of consistent practice. The mechanism is the same one the ancient world used intuitively, interrupting the chronic activation of the stress response long enough for the body to repair, restore, and reset. The Okinawan centenarian who wakes at 6 and spends her first hour in prayer and tea with friends is not being inefficient with her morning. She is doing the most precise anti-aging intervention available to any human being. She has been doing it every morning for a century. And she is still here. 10 habits. Thousands of years of accumulated observation. Ancient civilizations spread across the planet, speaking different languages, living entirely different lives, who all arrived at the same conclusions about how to live long and age well. You don't need a protocol. You don't need a stack. You need the habits that humans have always known worked. And you need to actually do them consistently for years, the way ancient people did. Drop a comment and tell me which habit you're starting this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more ancient and biblical secrets for healthy life and longevity. And we are just getting started.